Hello and welcome back to Park Fermi Parlay with Kieran Downey. We are here to talk about the best race of the 2024 season so far. A absolute 10 out of 10, a banger, and that is the Canadian Grand Prix. Did I expect Canada to pull this kind of a race out the bag? No, I didn't. I'll be completely honest with you. I was not prepared for how much of a banger this would be. I was excited by the prospect of changeable conditions, which we got, but I just wasn't ready for the drama from start to finish that was the Canadian Grand Prix. It was just every lap there was something. We had a battle for the win, we had battles for second, we had battles going on up and down the field. We were up to our eyeballs in DNFs. I don't think I'm ready to talk about Ferrari just yet, but thankfully I've got quite a few other drivers to get through before I get there because, and don't ask me how I'm doing, because I'm not well, bitch. Oh. Right, before we get into the drivers and before I have a breakdown, let's just have a look at the general overview of Canada. Because, so we started with rain, the track was very, very wet, but as the race started, the rain subsided, and as one thing Jacques Villeneuve liked to point out throughout the majority of his coverage this weekend, was just how quickly the track cleared up on the racing line. It dried very quickly. A lot of the drivers, bar two, were on intermediates, and then there was the call of what do these drivers do? What are they going to do? Because we don't have rain forecast for another 20 odd minutes. But by the time the rain starts again, these tyres are going to be pretty much mush. There is going to be nothing left of these intermediates that you've ran for an extended period of time. But by the time the track is ready for you to go into slicks, you'd actually be worse because the rain will have come. It was so nice to see all the different moving parts again. And then the rain started again, and it was just such a good race. My God, I am here for changeable conditions. I am here for a wet weather race. When people say they hate wet weather races, how? Just how? When it's like what we've just had in Canada, it's so good. I don't think I've enjoyed an F1 race this much in quite a while. Now, I don't want to hear anybody, oh, but Max Verstappen won. Yes, Max won, but he had to bloody work for it. He worked his ass off to get that win. It wasn't easy for him. It wasn't easy for any of these drivers to get where they got. And when you think about it this season, Australia, Sainz won, Max had DNF. In Miami, Norris won, Max had been screwed over by a safety car, Norris massively benefited from it. Monaco, Charles got pole, Charles won. That was always going to be the case. In any of those three races, was there any decent racing? No, not really, to be honest with you. And yes, you can obviously say that this time in Canada, the safety car massively benefited Max and not Lando, and it was a switcheroo of Miami. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Do I think that it made Canada any less of a race? No, I think Canada was the best race we've had so far this season. Okay, let's get into our drivers and break down their races one by one. Starting off with Kevin Magnussen, who qualified 14th and finished 12th. My God, at one point did I think Kevin Magnussen could have won this race. My God, I thought he was going to charge his way all the way to P1. That man charged from P14 at lights out to P4 in about 7 laps. It was insane. I have never seen something like that in God knows how long. He was charging through the field. It was like just one after the other, just constantly, just position after position. It was insane. And he had such a massive advantage over everyone else. He was closing the gap to P1 massively, very, very quickly. He just didn't have the benefit of the rain being there for long enough. The track dried up too quickly for him. He lost his advantage pretty quickly. And then had to pit and go on to inters, and from there he was just always on the back foot. Was it amazing to see Magnussen just charge his way through the field? Damn right it was. It was an absolute delight. Do you know what wasn't a delight? Watching Magnussen come in for his pit stop and Haas not being ready for him. Now, from what I've gathered, I think Magnussen just made that call because he was like, I can't stay out on these tyres any longer. But when he pulled into the pits, They didn't have tyres ready. That team was not ready for him to pit. And he just completely lost any advantage he had, and then had a fairly nondescript race after that. Was always going to have to pit before everyone else because his tyres weren't going to survive in those conditions. The track was drying too quickly. And then when he did pit, his team wasn't ready. However, do I think he would have done any better starting on intermediates? Probably not, to be honest with you. Next up, Nico Hülkenberg qualified 19th, finished 11th. Nico was the only other driver to start on wets, and he too went off to a flying start. Not as big a jump as Magnussen, but he did manage to gain a lot of positions in those opening laps of the race. Again, the wrong tyre to be on in hindsight, because he was always going to have to pit earlier. Didn't actually pit earlier though, was out a bit too long on those tyres. Completely the wrong call, and just lost any advantage he could have had as well. At one point he was just massively stuck in a DRS train. Not great in terms of, he didn't score any points, but the man went from 19th till 11th. And to be fair, will have benefited massively from the amount of DNFs that we got. But moving on to Valtteri Bottas, who qualified 17th, finished 13th. In fact, let's just lump him and Zhou together. Zhou Guanyu started 20th, finished 15th. Now, both of these drivers in the same sort of boat as Nico Hülkenberg. They both massively benefited from the amount of DNFs that we got this race. But I barely seen them. The only time I think I seen Zhou Guanyu was when he was allowed to go past the safety car because he'd been lapped. I generally think that with the Cyber drivers, it's like a blink and you'll miss them because they're never really shown on the broadcast at all. I even did that thing that I like to do. I went through all of their social media and I went through the F1 report and there's just nothing on them, which pretty much sums up their season. Nothing. So we're going to move swiftly on. And moving on to Daniel Ricciardo, who started 5th and finished 8th. Now, I had big hopes for Daniel Ricciardo. He seemed to have a fire lit under his ass, especially after the comments made by Jacques Villeneuve. But he didn't have a great start. It was lights out, away we go. He lost quite a few places pretty instantly. Was then noted and given a 5-second penalty for a false start. They showed us the replay of this, and I didn't see a false start. Even Martin Brundle was like, I don't think he did. Like, maybe he was just ever so eager off the line, but it generally seemed, from what I could see, that the lights went out and then Daniel went. Yeah, I wasn't quite too sure about that, but he got a 5-second penalty anyway. It obviously didn't work in his favour because he pitted and he had to obviously sit for 5 seconds. Just kind of was there, floating around in the points positions. I'm very glad that he scored points. Very, very glad. It's been a good weekend for Daniel all round. He has outscored his teammate. He's the only point scorer for VCarb this weekend. So, all in all, a very good weekend for Daniel, and it's nice to see it. Now what we need is consistency. I almost feel like somebody just needs to say something to Daniel Ricciardo or about Daniel every weekend just to get that fire burning in him. Because when he's good, he's good. So let's see what he can do in Spain next time round. All right, moving on. Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified 8th and finished the race in 14th. I actually feel quite bad for Yuki because he was having a very good weekend. He was having a very good race. He was keeping himself in those position points and then made a little mistake, spun off the track and ended up in 14th. It is a driver error and he is better than that. So yeah, it's just a shame. I feel quite bad for Yuki, but he is better than that, so he needs to pull it together. All right, moving on to Logan Sargent, who qualified 13th and is our first DNF. Of course, it's Logan Sargent who DNFs. So not once, but twice did Logan Sargent clip the barrier and send himself spinning. The first time he managed to get himself back out onto the track and start going again. The second time he obviously wasn't so lucky. It caused a safety car because they had to get the crane to lift his car off the track. It just seems like every time there's something decent happens for him, he takes like 10 steps back. I understand that your team principal is now saying, oh, we actually really want Carlos Sainz for our second seat. Like, we've already got Alex Albon. We now want Carlos Sainz. We want a different driver than the one we've already got. I understand that's quite rough to take as a driver who still has half a year left of a season. But surely that should ignite something in you where you are pushing that car to deliver the maximum you can week in, week out, in hopes that you might be able to secure some form of seat for 2025. Like, just Logan, please. Just the only one you're hurting here is yourself. Like, he's just qualifying bad, he's racing bad, and now he's crashing again. Like, enough's enough. Like, at one point, I felt bad at the prospect of James Vowles bringing in Kimi Antonelli to get rid of him halfway through the season. But now, actually, bring Kimi in. Get him in. Like, he can't do any worse than Logan's doing, let's be honest. Like, all sympathy I had for Logan has just gone out the window. It's vanished. Sayonara, see you later. Like, if Logan had raced for Red Bull, he'd be out. If Logan raced for Red Bull, he would have been a Nick de Vries. He'd have been out halfway through the season of 2023. If he'd managed to get to the end of the season, he wouldn't have had his contract renewed. If he had got his contract renewed, he'd be out now. Like, I'm just over the mediocrity of so many of these drivers. And this is the argument I have every week with Zhou Guanyu and Logan Sargent. Every single week I have this argument about mediocrity because there are so many talented drivers waiting in the wings to get into this series. And these people are just taking up spots and delivering nonsense every single week. Okay, moving on before I pop a blood vessel. Alex Albon, who qualified 10th and did not finish. Poor weekend for Williams, but actually Albon's is no fault of his own. I feel really bad for Albon because he was having a good race. That man delivered an absolutely incredible overtake on Ocon and Ricciardo. He was coming down the back straight, managed to get the overtake done on one of them just before the chicane, and then took the inside line over and managed to get past the other car. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. That man should be giving himself a pat on the back for just an incredible overtake. Just beautiful, beautiful driving. Well bloody done. Unfortunately, his race did end prematurely when Carlos Sainz spun on track, rear-ending Albon and causing Albon to spin into the barrier and causing a safety car and DNFing. Yeah, I feel quite bad for him. A case of there's nothing they could have done. He was a complete passenger. Fortunately, it's a DNF. Both Williams will be very disappointed. All right, next up, Esteban Ocon, who qualified 18th and finished 10th. I actually didn't think Esteban would be able to start this race because on the grid, the mechanics were still doing mad works to his car just before lights out, but obviously the Alpine team managed to get the car going and he didn't have any issues throughout the rest of the race. He ran a very good race. In fact, he actually managed to go from P18 to P8 at one point, and it was silent. He just silently was making moves. He obviously benefited from quite a few DNFs, but any overtake, I'd never even seen it. And then at one point I just looked at the timing tower and he was P8. And I was like, my God, where did that come from? I was like, do you know what, Esty? Fair play to you. Fair play that on the week that you've basically been fired and told that you're not going to have your contract renewed, that you've managed to gained 10 places in a Grand Prix and you're finishing P8. But then Alpine decided to do team orders, which was really weird because they were both in the points. It doesn't make any difference. Neither driver are in contention for the Drivers' Championship. It's not as if that extra point that Pierre would have gotten him any closer to maybe getting first in the championship. They both have like a point each to their name. It doesn't mean anything. In the constructors, fair enough, they're fighting Williams, but it was the same amount of points they would have gotten either way. The constructors didn't even mean anything. The constructors' championship, they were still going to get the same point. So why? Why make the team orders call? I don't understand it. Is this just another punishment for Esteban? Kind of feels that way. It's an unnecessary punishment. He doesn't even understand it. Nobody understands it. It does just seem like a childish punishment. All right, next up, Pierre Gasly qualified 15th, finished 9th. Pierre, pretty nondescript race, to be honest. I think there was just so much action going on with the other drivers that they just kind of fell to the wayside. He was the first driver to come in and go for slicks. He put on hard tyres. I'm counting him as the first because I don't want to get into Charles Leclerc putting on slicks when there was absolutely no reason to. But yeah, just was there. Again, team orders benefited him massively. He's scored more points than his teammate, which I guess he'll be very happy about, but I wouldn't put that on merit. I'm putting that on your teammates still getting punished for the move he did in Monaco. So yeah, just all around a very weird weekend for the Alpine crew. Don't quite understand it myself. All right, moving on. I'm going to cover both Aston Martins in one because apart from Lewis Hamilton being all over the back of Fernando Alonso at one point, again, I didn't see them. So Lance Stroll qualified 9th, finished 7th, and Fernando Alonso qualified 6th, finished 6th. All right race, scored points, all round actually a decent weekend for both the Aston Martin drivers. Again, the only time I ever really seen any of them was when Lewis Hamilton was all over the back of Alonso, but once Hamilton got past him, that was really it. So it seemed like you had your front pack of drivers, which was P5 to P1, and then you had your back pack of drivers, which was P8 backwards, because it seemed as if Fernando and Stroll, because it seems as if Alonso and Stroll were just kind of in their own little bubble. There was a lot going down the front end of the field. There was quite a lot going on the back end of the field, and these two just kind of sat in the middle. Doesn't mean they've not had a good weekend. They have had a good weekend. Some very good points were getting brought home for Aston Martin, which I'm sure they'll be very glad to have, considering they've had a pretty poor start to the year. Alonso will be very happy to be back in the points after spending a few weeks not having a great time. So yeah, very nice race from Aston Martin. Okay, now Oscar Piastri qualified 4th, finished 5th. I'm going to say that man battled hard. He was keeping the fight going to the very, very end. He was very good at the defending, but just towards the end, just kind of lost it a little bit. But just a very solid performance from Oscar Piastri. He should be very proud of himself because he did a very good job. I don't really have much more else to say on about it. Good weekend. Kept himself out of trouble. No issues really. Just good, solid driving. Good fighting, good driving. Well done, Oscar. All right, moving on. Lando Norris qualified 3rd, finished 2nd. So Norris got off to an okay start. I wouldn't say anyone had a flying start, apart from K-Mag, because it was lights out and you would have needed a calendar to see how quickly those drivers got into turn 1. Like, they were all so slow off the mark. There was something special that happened, and I don't quite understand it myself, but as the track dried up, Lando Norris was flying on those inters. Absolutely flying. He was absolutely nailing it. He was pulling in fastest lap and fastest lap. And at a time when everyone else was worried about, you know, the deg on the tyres being so high because the track was drying so quickly and you were going to overheat and cook your tyres, Norris just didn't have any of that problem, really. He just managed to sail through them. It was insane. But as I mentioned earlier, he did kind of get caught out by the safety car. The safety car benefit that he got in Miami swung the other way towards Max Verstappen. Then towards the latter stages of the race, he did try the overcut. He kept himself out on the inters a couple of laps longer than everyone else that he was battling that were going in and putting slicks on, and it just didn't quite work for him. That one extra lap that he did, he was gaining a little bit and then just began to fall back. And by the time he pitted, Verstappen managed to cruise past him and Lando couldn't really get back up to challenge Verstappen. He did, however, manage to get into 2nd after Russell made a little bit of a mistake. Yeah, a very good weekend from both McLaren drivers. They should both be very, very happy with themselves because, as I said for Oscar, I'll say the same for Lando. Some very good racing from both those drivers today. In fact, actually, that top 5 drivers, very, very good racing. Good, solid, honest racing, and it's what I loved so much about this Grand Prix. All right, moving on to Ferrari. Oh, do I have to actually talk about them? They were so bad. Why? Oh, from start to finish this weekend, Ferrari's just been a car crash. I mean, quite literally, Sainz crashed his car. Okay, so Carlos Sainz qualified 12th, did not finish. Didn't really see much of Carlos Sainz, to be honest with you, until he lost control of his car, spun it on the track, rear-ended Alex Albon, not only finishing his own race, but also finishing Albon's. He had some rear wing damage. He did manage to get it back to the pits. That was it. His race was over. Next. Oh, and this one's even worse. Charles Leclerc. I don't know what was going on with Charles Leclerc this weekend. He qualified 11th, he DNF'd. When the race started, he lost positions quite a lot. He was told that there was a engine problem. I think it was with his PU, but he was told to, you know, just keep fighting. He then was losing a lot of time. Then the safety car happened. He then pitted at the very end of the safety car to go on to slicks. A hard tyre. Ferrari, when it was raining, decided to put a man on a hard tyre. Are you all right? It was obviously the wrong tyre because they had to bring him in pretty quickly because he was losing so much time to change him back onto intermediates. Now, what I will say is that they basically turned the car off and back on again, and they thought they'd fixed his engine problem. He was then at the back of the pack. He then got lapped, and then they retired the car. Your Honour, I would not like to talk about this anymore. I would like to move on because it's actually just really upsetting that Ferrari have had this bad a weekend. Come on, you are second in the Constructors' Championship, and you have no points from this weekend. Like, we were 24 points away from Red Bull in the Constructors. With a decent finish from both those drivers, Perez had DNF'd. If both those drivers had scored points, Ferrari could have been leading the Constructors. Oh. It's just a weekend I would like to forget. All right, moving on before I lose the will to live. Lewis Hamilton. Qualified 7th, finished 4th. A great race from Lewis. His season best. I genuinely thought at one point that man was going to be on the podium. I thought he was going to be third. Probably caused a little bit of tension on the Mercedes pit wall with him and George doing a little bit of wheel-to-wheel action. They were actually told, I think it was George that was told on the radio, you know, like, you can race each other, but please be respectful and don't DNF, don't cause an accident. So yeah, very solid weekend from Lewis. Nice to see him actually up in the points. And he was so confident and happy with the car this weekend. It was so refreshing to see him confident. Not a bit of a sad act this weekend. It was really nice to see that, and I'm excited to see he seems pretty confident as well for going into Barcelona, so I'm quite excited to see what he can do there. Next up, his teammate George Russell, who qualified first and finished third. He is very upset with himself, but I don't think he should be because he had an absolutely incredible weekend. That P1 could have been any of the three of them. He was very feisty out on track. He was, you know, bringing that fight. He was not just conceding positions. He was fighting. Now, my only issue with George, and it seems to be something that happens consistently with George, is that when there is something on the line, he then begins to make quite a few errors. He had the error with him and Piastri. He sort of clipped Piastri. He ran wide quite a few times. He was off the track a few times and then ended up having to concede positions. And it just seems to be something that happens when the pressure gets to him, that he just makes mistakes. And he's seasoned enough now to not be doing that. So yeah, I think it's just something that plagues him a little bit, and he is going to have to sort that out. But yeah, very solid weekend for the Mercedes team. I bet Toto Wolff is doing cartwheels at them, scoring their first podium and getting a 3-4. All right, moving on. Second to last driver, Sergio Perez. Qualified 16th, did not finish. Now, up until his DNF, Perez was nowhere to be seen. He was fighting for 16th, I don't know, 14th, 15th, something like that. He was fighting for positions that Red Bull should not be fighting for. Then he spun off the track and crashed into the barrier, broke his rear wing, drove back to the pits, was leaving debris all over the track, was noted for driving in an unsafe condition, and at the time of recording, I don't know if he's facing any penalty. Got back to the pits and retired the car. It's beyond ridiculous now, Perez. Babe, come on. Like, pull it together. This is a joke now. He's going to need to pull it together now, because as I said in yesterday's podcast, Christian Horner's been pretty open that it is 1-year contracts. Yes, he's signed on for 2 years, but it's a 1-year contract. Horner's like, all my contracts are 1 year. So whether that's he's got a 2-year contract with Red Bull, but he's got a year at Red Bull and then they could stick him in an old V-carb. Christian Horner has also said that he's going to need to pull it together for Barcelona and beyond. So it'll be exciting to see what exactly Perez can do in Barcelona. And finally, Max Verstappen, who qualified second and finished first. It was nice to see Max having to fight. I know he doesn't like it. He likes to win by 20 seconds. It was nice to see him. Yes, he won, but he did deserve that win. He fought really hard. He did a very good job. He obviously did gain the safety car benefit. And yeah, just a good weekend for Max. And that is everything from the Canadian Grand Prix. What an absolute banger. 10 out of 10. Fantastic racing from start to finish. The interchangeable conditions, we got a couple of safety cars, some DNFs that I would rather not talk about. Championship not back on because Verstappen's peeled off into the lead again. But we will be back in Barcelona in 2 weeks for the Spanish Grand Prix. I will be back tomorrow to go through the predictions I made for the Canadian Grand Prix. Spoiler alert, I think I only got one of them right. But as I said, that's me. I'm going to go, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I will see you soon. I love you. Bye.